must have been brought up properly by your parents to be good audience members. I remember going through this with my children because I was a theater person, and they all, I would make them go to the theater with me, local community productions, and tell them to sit down and be quiet. So you all are very good. You get gold stars. Okay, so why am I talking? I'm Melinda Gallant, and I am a member of the Sandwich Arts Alliance. Back there, where are you? Kathy Aubin, can you turn up the lights for a second, the chandeliers? Yes, it says, there we go. Those aren't chandeliers, but we'll use, there we go. If you're a member of the Arts Alliance, please raise your hand. Oh my guess, look around. Applaud those people. They're keeping us in business. So thank you very much. Now, for the rest of you, oh man, sandwichartsalliance.org. It's easy, and it's so cheap. You can say you contribute with $25. I mean, it's inexpensively cheap. So I would encourage you all to join. Now, I would also like to tell you, take out your cell phones and take a picture of me. And then I would also like to tell you to put on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, all the thread, whatever it is now, and please say I'm at the Sandwich Town Hall watching a delightful show called Tales for a Winter's Night, okay? And then once you've done that, turn them off, okay? Turn them off because I have a couple of tellers up here that will jump down off the stage and get you if you don't turn them, if there's ringing. They want no ringing during their performances. So, the other thing I need to tell you is about in case of an emergency. Are we going to have an emergency tonight? Nah, but if we do, there are two exits. One is at the back of the room on your right, and one is at the front of the room on your right. And if there is any kind of fire or smoke, you cannot use the elevator. So I want to make sure I said that. Last thing I want to tell you is March 1st, Mike Block and the Bariba Consort will be here playing fabulous music. It's outstanding world music, and he's a Grammy winner, and he's going to perform on our little stage right here. And he was a Grammy winner just not too long ago. So it's pretty exciting stuff we've got going on. And after that, we have, in the middle of the month of March, we have Women's Weekend. Men are allowed to come if you behave yourselves. But we're doing all these things. We're having a women's art show. We're having the fat-ass cancer bitch back on our stage here doing her deal. We're going to have a play reading of a woman's play on Sunday afternoon. We've got songwriters coming in on Saturday afternoon doing wonderful things here on how they write songs, kind of like the Taylor Swift, version for Sandwich. She always tells why she writes the songs. It's kind of the same thing. So anyway, we're trying to follow in her footsteps. So anyway, I want to thank you for coming tonight. Now, our first performer, unfortunately, lives just down the street, and he has the Cape Cod flu. So he's not going to be here tonight. His name is David Stitt, and he is very depressed about the whole situation. But I promised him that he would be, next time we do this, he will definitely be a part of it. So our first person up is Diane Scharf. Now, Diane was the president of the Sandwich Arts Alliance. She's been everything to everybody with the Sandwich Arts Alliance, and then she got wise and moved out of town. Yep, she went to northern Rhode Island, I think, or western Rhode Island, or someplace that way. East Bay, Rhode Island, wherever that is. Anyway, she does a great job, and she's going to tell a story tonight that you're all going to love to hear. So thank you so much for coming. We will have a brief 15-minute intermission, and we will have snacks, and we will have water, and someday we hope to have wine, but not yet. So anyway, thank you all so much. We love having you here. I look out of here, I want to cry. I'm serious. It's just, it's wonderful. We're just glad you're here. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I have got a story for you. But first, before we start, I want to talk about the continuum of love and hate. This is extreme love. This is extreme hate. And then if you go over here, a lot of love, little hate, a lot of hate, little love, you kind of get the idea. Okay, when I was in my 20s or 30s, I had a strange feeling, a premonition, some may call, and it was very persistent, that someday I would find a dead body, a random dead body. Weird, huh? Too many mystery movies, too many mystery novels. So one day, my sister and I were driving in a different town, not this one, and we were in a sort of desolate tree, place, and we went to a corner. It was a crossroads, and we looked over to the right, and as we're looking, we see a person on the ground. Oh no, the dead body. I think to myself, my heart is racing, and I jump out to go over to check. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking to myself, oh, let's just get this over with. So as I go over and I bend down, she is breathing. She's not dead, but she is face down, ramrod straight on the sidewalk in the dark. And her face is in the gritty part of the sidewalk. She is, what I notice is there's a tremble. She's trembling. It's almost like a fluttering. It's got her whole body. It's very rhythmical. It's almost like her body is humming. And it keeps her locked in that position. So I'm taking a look, and then I look over my shoulder, and I see the red lights flashing. And down comes a policeman in a car. He jumps out, and he comes over. He's a huge guy. And he comes over, and he looks at her, and he says, "Oh, I know her." "You know her? Like this is an everyday event." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." He said, "She's a soldier, and she has PTSD events." I said, "PTSD? This is PTSD? It has her locked in a vulnerable position in the middle of the night?" And he nodded sadly and walked out to get her husband on the line. Well, I bend down and I say, "How did this happen to you? What happened to get you here at this crossroads?" I understand now that we are at the crossroads between here and there. Did you see your buddies die? Was there a lot of blood? Was there a lot of commotion? Was there a lot of noise? What happened to you? What happened? And I think to myself, I will never know. But at least I had this very strong feeling that I wanted to protect her, at least for the next few minutes. So I bend down, and I don't touch her, because I don't want to make it worse, and I just gently blow on her cheek. I want her to know that I, a stranger, am here, and that I am no threat to her. I'm at the here, even though she is there. And then I just try to stay with her, witness, make sure that no one else is bothering her. After a while, the police come. Again, they're back. And I'm still there because I want to protect her. What I really want to do is hug her, tell her we love her, and say to her, "It's okay, it's okay." But then I would be lying. So I stand silently instead. It got to a point where if you didn't know I was protecting, and how would anybody know, you would think that I was gawking. I did not want to do that. And I was getting a vibe for the policeman like, hey, lady, there's nothing else you can do. And I'm thinking, there is nothing else I can do. There's nothing else I can do. So I look at her and I say, please be well, and I will never, ever forget you. I will witness this. And then I slowly walked away. And to this day, I have not forgotten her. I still bear witness to the agony that she must have endured in order to make her stuck on that sidewalk in the cold, face down on the gritty cement. Back to my continuum. Love in the extreme for the soldier warrior. Hate for war. Thank you very much. Woo! Okay. Now, I would like to have you see. The next one up is John Richard. He's a great guy. Everybody knows him. He plays really well. Actually, I just met him. But I'm sure he's going to be very entertaining. Thank you all. Bye.
Well, thank you, Diane. So my love-hate story is about junior high school. Grades 7, 8, and 9, there might be some people here old enough to have been to one. They don't exist anymore. But as you may remember, no matter when you went, 7th grade is when you're introduced to the harsh realities of life. Among them, where you stand in relation to your peers. And where I stood in relation to my peers was at the bottom of the pile. I was a goofy kid. I had big glasses, buck teeth, a paunch, and a smile that said, I have no idea what's going on. And there's no lack of volunteers at that level of your life to remind you of who you are and where you stand. So as you go down the hallway, some people will just deliberately bump into you. Others may knock your books on the floor. And then there's the occasional person who will just give you a punch in the arm just for the hell of it. And one of my strongest memories of this time is standing in line at the cafeteria waiting to pay and go in, and watching two kids come down the line, two friends, Billy Hawes and Bobby Cross. And what they were doing is they were collecting protection money from kids like myself. Now, Billy was tall, slender, and the ultimate in cool. And his friend Bobby was lean and muscular and always on the edge of being angry. And Billy would do all the talking. And he would come up to you and he'd look at you and he'd say, lend me a dime. And Bobby would look at you like, you better do that. So of course, I gave him a dime. If you didn't have a dime, he would accept a quarter. Now, some kids tried to get out of this by saying they didn't have any money. And Billy had two answers for that. The first one was, okay, jump up and down. Of course, if you had any money, it jingled in your pocket, and you forfeited it for lying to Billy. The other one was, okay, how about I go through your pockets, and any money I find, I keep. They were tough times. And you could lose your money in any of the bathrooms and anywhere in the school because you might run into them there. You might also run into Tony Cipollina, who was cutting class. He'd been left back twice. He no longer had any interest in academia whatsoever, but he did entertain himself by pushing around any of the smaller kids who would come in the bathroom. So you might walk in and Billy would be like, hey, did I say you could come in here? No. Well, then get out. Get out of here now, faggot. Tony had privacy issues and some homophobia. So, do I need to tell you I avoided the bathrooms? And in the hall, I felt like prey on the Serengeti. And then when I went to class, it was not a whole heck of a lot better. You know, in elementary school, we had very little homework. And when we get to 7th grade, every teacher was giving you homework with a completely straight face. I had no idea such a thing existed. And as far as I was concerned, it was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. They could tell me what to do when I was in school, but when I was out of school, I was like a dog off the leash. They had nothing to say about it, so I refused to do homework. Well, you may be surprised to hear a 7th grader treating homework as a moral imperative, but that's a risk you run when you raise a kid in the Presbyterian church. So the school's answer was pretty simple. They just gave me detention. Do the work that you didn't do before. It was kind of an early IEP. And it was okay with me because I was in school, I was under their control, I would do the work. When I left school, I would still not do today's work. And it went on like that. So at this point, you may wonder what it was that I found to love about the Shawshank Junior High School. And it actually, believe it or not, started in lunch, because lunch was very long. It was 45 minutes, so we had plenty of time to eat and go outside, and a bunch of us played touch football year-round. And it wasn't long before we were sitting together at the tables. And we were a motley crew without an ounce of social cool between us, but we didn't care. We all had our moments of glory on the field. We were equals. We were non-judgmental. And it was a classic case of adolescent boys finding safety and acceptance in numbers. And the other thing is going to surprise you, given my moral stand, but I had 2 classes in the 8th grade that I absolutely loved. And the first was American history with Mr. Martin, who was an exotic animal. He was a liberal from Alabama. And he really was. And he was amazing. He was a strong individual, educated, witty, strong sense of irony. It was great. And I remember when we got to the Civil War, Mr. Martin told us that he had come north to explain to us that we had been hoodwinked into thinking we had won the Civil War because we had not. Just because we had won a few battles, that did not mean we had won the war. And of course, now we know he was right. He was not joking. So besides Mr. Martin, there was Mr. Greeny in English. And Mr. Greeny's mantra was, all is fair in love and war and Mr. Greeny's English class, which meant you could not complain about pop quizzes, essays, or test questions. And the result was you had to be alert for 45 minutes. And Mr. Greeny had a wonderful sense of humor. He never took us too seriously. He never belittled anybody. It was just a wonderful experience. It was a gift. And finally, 9th grade came along, and we thought we had the world figured out. Sports was our life. We had no idea what girls were doing. We certainly weren't going to find out. And occasionally, we would go to the new hamburger joint for a treat. The new McDonald's with no indoor seating, 15-cent hamburgers, 15-cent French fries, and a delicious 22-cent thick shake, later found to be made with petroleum products. And it was 1966, and we were on top of the world. And little did we realize we had just witnessed the swan song of the Wonder Years. Thank you for listening. And now we're fortunate to have Mr. Robert Minshaw, an actor who lives in East Falmouth but will travel anywhere for the right part. Won't you please welcome Mr. Minshaw?
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here tonight. Thank you, Melinda, for asking me to be here. Gee, what would an actor tell for a story? Might have something to do with theater. But in order for me to stay sort of on point here a little bit, I'm going to have a little bit of assistance here. So to make sure that I'm saying the right things at the right time, first I'm going to talk to you about a quote from a little man most of you might have heard, William Shakespeare. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. That would be an accurate representation of me, because the stories I'm going to tell you tonight are going to be what my experience has been with what I consider to be the perfect entity, which is somebody. Great minds think alike. Lost my train of thought there. Anyways, we're going to go back to Shakespeare. So, my stories involve my experiences on stage and how they have affected my life. I've been married and divorced in the theater. Not literally in the theater, you know what I'm saying. But anyways, so my story is this. I'm playing the Beast, and there's a scene at the end of the show where I'm supposed to pick Belle up. It's right after I've come back alive, right? And Belle is supposed to stand up, and we're supposed to kiss, and I twirl her around, and that's, of course, Beauty and the Beast, right? Well, this particular night, of course, community theater being what it is, it's always an adventure. Every show's different. This particular night, in order for the scene to go through the transformation where the Beast transforms into the Prince, there was a trap door on the stage that we had to use, and it was classic community theater. But they used these things called glow bubbles in order that you would flash a dark light on, and consequently it would look like bubbles that glowed, right? Well, the problem with bubbles is that they're soap, right? So I pick Belle up, and I go to kiss her and spin her, and my feet go right out from underneath me, and we both go down on the ground, and Belle, of course, because I wanted her to not injure herself, she lands on top of me, and right at that instant, Mrs. Potts, who's off stage, has a line, and her line as she pokes her head in goes, "Oh my," right as I'm laying on top of Belle. Oh my, indeed. Second story, and this is another, this one's a little bit more gruesome, you might say. Melinda knows this story because she was there the night it happened. If you could imagine me with 6-inch platform heels playing Dr. Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Show. Fishnets, hey, you know, I learned a lot of appreciation for what women have to go through. In this particular night, there's a scene where I've created my man, Rocky. Usually in the show, Rocky is played by somebody who is beefy and big and whatnot. And I present a problem with that because I towered over the kid that played Rocky. He was big enough so I could carry him around like an infant. So during the particular scene, he's supposed to stand up. He's doing push-ups whilst I straddle him. And then he's supposed to stand up and put his head right in here so we have a moment together. This particular night, he thought it would be a good idea if he stood up straight and whacked his head right back. And he hit me right in the nose while I was singing a song. And it was appropriate. I was wearing Dr. Scrubs at the time because they became covered in blood, including him. And I kept singing the song. I run off stage. Fortunately, there's a little dance break right there. My wife, Corinne, was stage managing. She races backstage. She's like, "What do you want to do? You want to stop the show?" And I'm like, "Ice, ice," because intermission was coming up. Just had to get through a couple more songs, right? So she goes, "Great." She runs out to get ice. I jam 2 wads of Kleenex up in my nose so that they're sticking out like this. They look like I have tampons in my nose. And I go back out, and I finish the song, and the funniest thing about it was that it was a night where we had 2 shows. This was the 8 o'clock show, and we had a midnight show later that night, too. So needless to say, I put a little ice on it and it ended up being fine. But what Melinda did is it happened, and my head snapped back. Of course, I'm wearing garters. Men, shut up. I'm wearing garters, and one of the garter pieces flips off through the air and lands on the ground out in the house. Now, This particular theater we're in, I was this close to the people. And, well, needless to say, I went out and I finished the number, and then Melinda comes out and she says, well, they're looking around for this little thing that fell off my garter because they thought I'd broken out a tooth. No, I just broke my nose. But I finished the number, and how are we doing on time, by the way? Does anybody know? Nobody cares. The last thing I want to share with this is how theater has positively affected my life, because I found my wife. And the last experience, which was a great, 2011, I was doing Guys and Dolls, and my wife was pregnant with our son. And it was the second weekend of performances. By now, she was a dangerous pregnancy. So at the end, I had to push her around on a wheeled chair because she was directing Guys and Dolls, right? And I was Sky Masterson, right? So that night, all of a sudden, Friday afternoon of our second week of performances, we have a show that night at 7:30. My wife calls me and she's like, I'm at the hospital. We're having the baby today. He's not due until Pearl Harbor Day. This is 11/11/11. My wife's birthday is 7/7/77. Not making that up. So Remy is born. He goes through a C-section. Everything is fine. He ends up going to, my wife says, you have to go to the show. You have a show tonight. So I go, and my daughter is with me. We were flying. We leave the hospital. Everything seems fine. We go home. We get dressed. I go to the theater. I get 8 calls from the hospital whilst I was getting ready, saying, and of course you're panicked, thinking that something terrible is wrong. My son ended up having to go to Boston. He was fine. But that night, whilst giving out cigars, my son was in the hospital, but the reason I'm saying it is because everything ended up being fine. Remy is now 12 years old, and he was and will always be our littlest gangster. So I think that's all I have to say. Sorry if I rambled too long. The next individual that's speaking, Karen, I have just met her this evening, but I'm really excited to hear, the reason I brought the paper up here, was to hear her story about the prodigal daughter's return. So with that, I will thank you all for listening to me ramble.
Go to your bosom, knock there, and ask the heart what it doth know. It was July 1976. Alice, 42 years old, a bright, beautiful, single mom, packed her 4 scrappy kids, ages 8 to 17, in the back and front of her 1974 Chevy Impala and our Great Dane dog, Babe, and roared down towards the Cape. Alice was redefining her life at that time, and we were going along for the ride. Alice never looked back. I was Alice's 17-year-old daughter, and I wanted familiar. My mother brought us to something very unfamiliar, and I arrived to Sandwich, Massachusetts, kicking and screaming. I screamed at the back of her Helen Reddy haircut and said, I will never forgive you. For the rest of my life, I will never forgive you. Why? Why are we here? And my mother didn't bite. Her response was, I think the dog needs to go pee. There's woods up in the back. Just take her there and let her do her business. And I was enraged. My adolescent rage at that time, I just wanted to just break out. I wasn't down for this town when I arrived, and I wanted to escape. As soon as I graduated, I stayed here for a few years. I made some money, and then I went to Boston. I went to school. I dropped out, and I had this crazy notion that I wanted to go cross country. So I did. I drove cross country in a car that should have been condemned. Should have been brought to Knowlton's and sold for scrap metal, but I went across the country and landed in West Hollywood, California. And when I got there, I stayed for 8 months, and it was pretty much a blur. And by the time I was ready to leave, I was in rough shape. I called my mom crying, and I said, I think I need to come home. And she said, girl, what time's your flight? I said, I don't know, I just need to come home. And she said, don't worry, everyone needs a soft place to land. I'll be there at the airport to pick you up. So I came back home, and I got repaired. My mom put me back together again. And when I was ready to stand and be strong, I left Sandwich again. And I went to Boston, and I went back to Boston, and I dabbled in employment, and I was looking for love in all the wrong places. And I worked as a waitress in a very popular restaurant. It's where I met my husband, Johnny. He and I were out one night with a bunch of friends, and I asked him about, where he was from and what he did, and he said, I'm a student, and I'm studying finance. I said, oh, finance. Now, where we were, the place was really loud, and I said, oh, finance. What a catch. So I called upon my savvy of finance, and I really didn't know much. I said, oh, so you're studying banking and personal finance? Do you want to be a CFO of a corporation? No, you got it wrong. I'm studying fine arts. I go to the School of Fine Arts at BU, and I said, and I stopped. I said, oh, that's cool. I like art. So consequently, we dated again, and the lightning bolt moment was when he and I were at the Gardner Museum. It was a rainy day, and I remember the moment, the lightning bolt moment, when I felt something. And we were standing shoulder to shoulder in front of the painting, Rembrandt's painting, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. And Johnny was explaining to me chiaroscuro. And I thought, chiaroscuro, that sounds Italian. He said, it's about light and dark and shadow. And then he explained the symbolism of the painting. And I thought, oh, the symbolism, fear and faith. Fear and faith. And something became very calm inside. And I thought to myself, I want to marry this man. Someday, there was something about him that was really special. He was the truest person I had ever met. And I called my mother up, and I failed to mention that my mother was a street smart Southie girl. And she was this fearless, no-nonsense person. And I told her, I said, Mom, I think I met this guy he's really great. His name's Johnny Provenzano, and he's really interesting, and I want to come down, and I want you to meet him. And she said, where's he from? I said, he's from Southie, Mom. She said, oh my God, Southie. Where are his people from? What church does he go to? I said, I don't know. I didn't ask him, but let's just see what happens here. She said, well, bring him down. I want to meet him. Okay, so we got down on the P&B bus, and we went down to visit my mom, and we stayed for the day. And my mom said, do you jit? Johnny said, what? What is that? She said, jitterbug. Get up and jitterbug with me. So Johnny, great dancer, started to dance with my mom, and she was just she just fell right there too for Johnny. And it turns out that Johnny's family, his mom, his dad, they grew up in Southie, and my mom recognized his aunt's, his uncle's name, and she was like, "Oh my God, I think we were like 2 blocks away from living each other with, near each other," and it was this kind of this wonderful connection. So consequently, it was a happy day, and we got back to Boston, and we ended up getting married, and we have 2 daughters. Now, love is something, like when you're in love, it's a wonderful feeling. Things just kind of, there's a magic about it. But then we had Sadie, and then we had Camille. And I knew nothing about love until I met Sadie, and we had Camille, and that was a wonderful thing. And here's the thing. I recognized at that moment as a mother and feeling quite calm about where I was in my life. We had brought the girls down to Sandwich many times during the summer, and they learned how to swim at Sandy Neck Beach, and we watched them jump off the boardwalk too many times to count. And I started to warm up to this place. And so I started to like it more and more. I was running when I first left. I was running from something. I was restless and wild, and I never was satisfied, but I felt at ease being back here. And my mom was wonderful, just loving to be a grandmother. And so when I think about that time when I was raging, my adolescent rage was blinding me, I thought about my mother's strength and how incredibly fearless and what she did to bring us here and give us a beautiful life. And so I know my mother has grit, but I mostly know that she has gratitude. She has gratitude for so many things in her life, all the blessings, all the people that she met while she was here. And she never takes anything for granted, and I've learned so much from her. I am also fearless, and I also have, I feel grateful every day. So I want to say to my grandchildren, Francis, Elena, I know you're here, Jack, George, John, Nana, your Nana, she is the epitome of greatness. You are standing before greatness. She is a legend. She has helped people. She has helped me become who I am in my life. And I want you to recognize how truly wonderful she is. And don't forget that it's important to recognize her strength, because everything that I am, she's taught me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. You know, it's kind of dark out there, but I think you all stuck it out, and it's good to see you back here for the second half. You know, I called a lot of my relatives. I wasn't sure how many people would be here tonight, and I said, you know, you got to get over here and see me talk. And the first question they all ask is it free? I said, well, no, you got to pay. And they said, forget that. We'll wait for Thanksgiving. You always do too much talking then anyway. So, well, I'm Jim Coogan. I'm glad to see you all here. It's good that you're here, and it's good that I'm here. And I say that because next month, on March 27th, I will turn 80 years of age. I know that's kind of a big number. I was thinking that, you know, I could have been a schoolmate with Joe Biden. I can imagine him and me going home and watching American Bandstand on a black and white TV. He probably had a thing for Annette Funicello. 80's a big number. I know there's at least one or two of my friends out here that are older than that, so they're probably looking at me as the kid. But, you know, it's a big number. I thought to myself when I was approaching this milestone, I had some things I wanted to do. And one of them was to get an earring. And I did that. My grandchildren took me to the paper store about a month ago and punched my ear, and I got it. They thought that was pretty good. I hadn't really had a lot of plans on that, but they thought I had to do it. The second thing on the list was I wanted to get another tattoo, which I will be getting next month. And then the third thing, I talked to my son about this. He lives in New Hampshire, and I said, you know, I want to ski downhill. And it wasn't that I had never skied, and I had skied, but it'd been a long time since I had. And he said, well, Dad, he said, that's a good idea, but do you think you ought to run it by your wife? And I said, well, yeah. And so I always looked to her for advice, and the first thing she said when I approached this, and she said, are you out of your mind? Well, anyway, 2 weeks ago, I went up to New Hampshire, and I was on this mountain in Hanover, Whaleback Mountain. And I put the skis on, and I got going, and I went up there. I didn't get to the top of the mountain because there was a lot of ice, but I was up there pretty good. And then I got there, and I looked down, and I realized my wife was right. I was out of my mind. Well, I made it down, and there are no real problems, but I checked that box. And, you know, like they say that 60 is the new 40, I found on that day that 80 is the new 79. Well, when Melinda called me about this little gig tonight, she said, you know, the theme is love and hate, or love, whatever. And I thought, well, love's pretty good because, you know, we got Valentine's Day, but hate's also a good story, too. So I had to think about, you know, how I was going to do this. In all the years that I've been on the Cape, and that's just about all of them, I've been collecting stories, and I have lots of stories, some of them tragic, some of them humorous, some of them with love, some of them with hate. And I thought, you know, every town has a story. We have our stories here in Sandwich. You know, we have the Spite Barn, which is a kind of cool story. You've got the tale of Elvis singing in front of the first church. Lots of stories, some of them true, some of them embellished, but all a lot of fun. I thought, you know, what will I do for a story? And then I thought, well, I think Provincetown is the place. Provincetown is a community, a village, a town that I think has more stories per capita than any place on Cape Cod. And most of them make you smile. A couple of years ago, it was in the summertime, I had a friend that was on the assembly of delegates, and every month they meet at a different restaurant and have lunch, and they discuss policy or whatever they do. And he said he was going down to Provincetown for lunch. It was July, and he was going to go to lunch at the Red Inn. I said, oh, great, nice place. I said, well, I'll be interested in what happened when you, let me know when you come back. Well, I didn't see him for a couple of weeks, and I ran into him in Hyannis. And I said, hey, John, how did it go down there at Provincetown? He said, it was really something. He said, I was down there, it was a hot day in July. And he said, you know, I was walking in front of the town hall down there on Commercial Street, and he said, I saw a man wearing a tie. Well, I thought, geez, Provincetown, that is unusual. And I said, boy, that's something on a hot July day. And my friend John said, yeah, it sure was unusual. That was all he was wearing. So Provincetown is a unique place, and I always think of Provincetown. It's a place of love, really, because everything goes down there. You always say Provincetown's a place to go to do the thing you wanted to do that you never want anybody to know that you did when you got back home. It is a unique community, and if we go back over 100 years, Provincetown attracted a number of artists and writers, people that came from New York City. And around 1915-16, this group from Greenwich Village, a large number of people, came up to Provincetown and discovered it as a resort and loved it in the summertime. They lived in the East End, and they formed the Provincetown Players. The theater was on a wharf owned by Mary Heaton Vorse, and the people that were there included Jack Reed. He was a communist, a Bolshevik. Eventually ended up getting killed in the Russian Revolution. This was a group of progressives. They were socialists, communists, Bolsheviks, free lovers, the whole bit. And they arrived in Provincetown and really took the town by storm, because in 1915-16, Provincetown was a pretty quiet community of Portuguese fishermen and old Yankees. And so this was a group that attracted a lot of attention. Some of the other people that showed up was Susan Glaspell. She was a good novelist at that time. Edna St. Vincent Millay, a poetess from that period. And Harry Kemp. Harry Kemp was later known as the poet of the dunes. He was sort of a Jack Kerouac before Jack Kerouac. Interesting group. But the most famous of them, and the one that probably lasted the longest in the light, was Eugene O'Neill. Now, Eugene O'Neill is known as one of America's greatest playwrights, and certainly his record attests to that. I mean, he won 4 Pulitzer Prizes for his plays. But when he showed up in Provincetown in 1916, he was kind of an unknown. And he did move into that group and worked well with them. He produced his first play in the summer of 1916, which was called Bound East for Cardiff. And it was sort of based on his time as a merchant sailor. He had traveled around a lot. He'd been born in New York City in the 1880s. His father, I think, was a vaudevillian. His mother was, she assisted with the father on their road trips. So he didn't have much of a family life. They did have enough money that he went to private school. He dipped a little bit in Yale and spent some time in Harvard. I don't think he ever got a degree in either one. He didn't get one. But, he knocked around a bit. But when he got into Provincetown, he found that he had found the place. And his creative juices really started to move, and he did well there. Well, one of the things that he wanted to do and liked doing was going to the Provincetown Library. Now, the Provincetown Library was run by a woman by the name of Abby Putnam. Now, Abby was probably about 15 years older than O'Neill. He was in the late 20s, early 30s at the time. And she ran the library with an iron fist. And she did not like Eugene O'Neill. He was often, intoxicated when he showed up. He wasn't a resident, a legal resident anyway. He was a visitor. She called him a stranger. And she really made it hard for him. He wanted to read the New York Times in the reading room, and she made sure that he was the last one to get it. She charged him $1.25 to take out a book because he wasn't a resident. He had to have somebody local sign for him. He did not like this at all. And the bad blood between Abby Putnam and Eugene O'Neill just grew from that 1916-17 period. O'Neill used to come up to Provincetown in the spring, and he'd usually stay, at the Atlantic House up in Provincetown and do his writing. And he continued to have this problem with Abby Putnam. But in 1922, he wrote a play called Beyond the Horizon. and it got the Pulitzer Prize. So when he showed up that spring, he went right to the library, and he said, "Now do you know who I am?" And she said, "Yeah, you're the same old drunk as always. You're out of the library." This just went on, and this bad blood continued. Well, Eugene O'Neill kept working on plays and doing very well, and he wrote a play in 1924 called Desire Under the Elms. Now, if you know anything about O'Neill's plays, they were very dark and they were pessimistic, and the characters were disillusioned, and very often bad things happened to them. At any rate, this play, Desire Under the Elms, was based on a theme where a younger woman, she was in her 30s, she married a farmer in Connecticut, and her goal was probably to get the farm. The guy was an old guy, and I guess she figured, he wasn't going to last long and she'd get the farm. But when she got out there, she found that the farmer had a son, and she became very attractive to the son. And there was a romance that went on and a connection there, and eventually she became pregnant by the son. Well, the husband, the older man, found out about it. He was very angry. There was a lot of anger in this play. And the son didn't really want the child, and he told her, this isn't going to work. And she said, "But I love you," the whole thing. And so to prove her love for the son, she killed her baby. Now, this is pretty dark. And so you're thinking of Eugene O'Neill, and he's working on this play. He's got to come up with the names for the characters. And so you can probably see this coming. Who does he put for this woman who is basically an adulteress and a murderer? She's Abby Putnam. So when you think about the theme tonight, love, hate, let's add revenge to this too, because, poor Abby, she has gone down infamously in history in the play Desire Under the Elms. The upshot of the whole thing, and what I think kind of concludes it, is that when you think of O'Neill, there's a genius there, but it's a genius with a flaw, clearly. He was an alcoholic. He had very unstable marital relations. 2 or 3 wives, I think he had. He had 2 sons that committed suicide. His one daughter, Una, married Charlie Chaplin. She was like 19 and he was 55, so he never spoke to her again. And in the last 10 years of his life, O'Neill had Parkinson's and was very debilitated, couldn't write, and it was kind of a sad ending when he died in Boston. He was about 67 years old. But Abby Putnam sort of landed on her feet, and when you think about it, she retired from the library when she was about 65, and she stayed in Provincetown. She was a native of the town, by the way. Her father's people were the Putnams, like Israel Putnam from the American Revolution. They were real Yankees. At any rate, after she retired, she took up the trumpet. And she said, when the Republicans get back into the White House, I'm going to go down in front of the town hall and we're going to play the Star-Spangled Banner all day long. Well, of course, at that time, there hadn't been a Republican since before Franklin Roosevelt. But when Dwight Eisenhower was elected in 1952, she carried it out and stood down the whole day in front of the Provincetown Town Hall playing the Star-Spangled Banner on the trumpet. And a couple of years later, in 1956, she died at age 83. And I think in Provincetown, she was much better remembered than Eugene O'Neill. Thanks so much. Now, just to carry on the second half here, we have Suzanne McMillan, and she's going to be talking about a theme that relates to night and day. So, Suzanne, you got it.
I don't want this to go down. Okay. I have an old story. How old? It was so old that the planks on the boardwalk with the names on them were still screwed in there. So it wasn't that long ago. Early many mornings, but one particular morning, there was 4 cars that drove into the south end parking lot by the boardwalk. There were still stars out, you could see planets, but it was lightening up with red glow in the distance. If you had to define it, it would not be the sky night, the blue night, and they wouldn't call it first light. Satellite. Beth, satellite. But you might call it just the crack of dawn. 4 women got out of the 4 cars there instead of adjusting their shoes, getting water bottles, getting ready to run. They had their keys tucked in pockets and their cell phones and got their earbuds in, starting stretching with each other, and then one by one went walking over to the boardwalk and loosening up. The 4 met at the parking lot of Town Neck Beach and started a run. They set their watches and off they went, and soon were in a cadence, and the sounds of their shoes and running shoes were in sync. Off through Town Neck, down Freeman Ave, around by the left, by the Seal restaurant. They went down. They heard from the marina, the diesel, the low rumbling diesel engines of fishing boats ready to go out, and waved to the people down there. Light was coming up. The sun was definitely coming up. And lights in some of the little houses along the way were starting to light up inside. Down they went, finally out to Tupper Road, and along there until they crossed 6A. Back to Tupper, down to the sweet cold water by the old town hall here. Then around up to Grove Street, they jogged together up until they got up to Heritage Plantation and back and forth along the roads. They were training to be in the Falmouth Road Race. They won the lottery to be in it and did not want to fall flat on their faces. So down they came and started to retrace their steps down past the marina and onto Freeman, back to Town Net parking lot. There was glimpses at each other, and shoes were taken off, and their earbuds were returned to their pockets. Their water bottles were taken off, and they crossed the boardwalk till they got to the railing that crossed around Mill Creek, and up they went, yelling, "Good day." So I felt envious when I heard this story. I am not a morning person. I don't greet the day. I had a history of running down Beach Road to catch Canning's bus. When I got to high school at Sandwich High, 34 in my graduating class, I felt like I belonged to a tribe because people were staying up later. And I love that. They weren't morning people. Then I got to college, and wow, there was really a lot of people that would stay up all night. And that was wonderful, too. But slowly, those people found their own way, found their own rhythm. I made the good judgment to get a degree in nursing. So that worked for me. I worked for 40 years as a pediatric nurse. I took care of children, 20 years of it over at Falmouth Hospital. And the secret is, for nurses, they pay you more if you work in the evening. And even more if you work overnight. But it wasn't the money, it was where I fit. I felt a sense of energy, a sense of awareness, a sense of invigoration. I felt a sense of growing antennas, being aware of other people, reading them, reading the room. Anybody ever hear of that? Reading the room in theater and food, restaurants and stuff. You read the room, or as actors. So coming on to work evenings, which worked out good for childcare, was also wonderful to walk into the unit there. You would, I loved the science, I loved the assessments, I loved meeting the families and kids. I loved making sure they were healthy, were healing, in a healing place, and that I was doing the best I can to help them. But again, it was reading the child, reading the families, reading coworkers, and even reading yourself to understand the best way to respond to others. We had a little, it was wonderful to look across and try to gauge what was needed. I remember a mom with dark circles under her eyes and a little one in an oxygen tent with the plastic down and the mist and oxygen going. The mom looked so tired. So I called her out and I said, "You need to drink water. You need some chicken noodle soup because pediatrics has lots of chicken noodle soup. And then it's okay to go back there." And I lifted up the plastic around the bed and put Mom in there till they were all foggy together. And I watched the monitors as the babies, the little ones' heart settled down and her oxygen level was better, their breathing was better. Until the mom was just closing her eyes, and the little one took the monitor that was on the finger and stuck it in his mouth and looked like a glowing glow bug. Other times you would have kids there. One time, when I first started there, it was a small hospital, and the administrator would come into the ward once a month at least, and would bring the long telephone bill. And he would be checking who's been making phone calls, long distance phone calls. it was a very small hospital then. Other times you would take care of each other. There was a little one we had one time who was blue. She was a little blue baby. There was nothing they could do. And the parents were using and not able to care for each other. So security was there a lot, and social works was there a lot. And we as nurses started showing up to work with pink outfits for this little girl because we wanted her surrounded by pink with her little fragile blue look. And as we did that over days, we noticed the parents glancing at us and calming. And we encouraged them to hold her and love her as we were holding and loved her too. There were other special times we would take care of each other. One time I was coming into work and one person said, "Don't worry, he'll be okay." What would you do? Worry. And the other one said, "He's coming in an ambulance with a knife in him." I said, "He's in first grade. How can you have a knife in you in first grade?" He had seen a cute little girl and decided to give her a kiss in our class and dove for her, and she dodged, and he ended up with a X-Acto knife in his finger. I said, "Next time, we don't do that." So again, we would take care of each other, and it was really a special thing. And the kids. When I had coworkers, sometimes they would say, the cranky baby, cranky toddler, and they would say, "Here's $1. You will not be able to get that kid settled down in less than 4 run-throughs a song." It was a cha-cha song with Goldilocks. And I would get up and I'd say, "I'll take your buck and I'll take it at the end too. You keep track." And then we would start and I'd do my itty-bitty cottage in the itty-bitty forest, lived the 3 bears, cha-cha-cha. And on it would go, and you'd go slower, and I always got it in under 3 times. The best times, though, were sometimes just going home at night. I was tired. Sometimes it would be 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'd come down on Route 130 and look out over the bay, and there was a million bajillion stars. So I'd drive home, turn the heat up on the car, and leave it running, throw a blanket in the dryer, and go up and get my littlest one, carry her down, wrap her up, and off we'd go to the beach. Looking at the stars, there's the Big Dipper. There's Cassiopeia's chair. There's Orion. There's the belt. And the first star is for Beth. And the second star is for Scott. And the third star is for Catherine. Thank you. Bob and his husband were wash-ashores to our town, but quickly we gobbled them up, and we gobbled their food, and they've been just important people in our town. We love to have them here.
Good evening. When Melinda approached me about participating in tonight's storytelling with the theme of love or hate, I was really stymied about what I would tell a story about, what story I would tell. And I think she called me a couple of times. And finally, it occurred to me that I had written a somewhat of a love letter to my 6th grade teacher 5 years ago, after 50 years of not seeing her. And I thought I might share that, but before I do, I think I need to give you a little bit of background. Prior to 6th grade, little Bobby King was, believe it or not, something of a behavior problem at school. It wasn't that I didn't do my schoolwork, but I just had a really hard time giving my undivided attention to my teacher and the classroom. I always had to have like a little side gig going on with a fellow troublemaker who, would pass notes or talk in class or shoot spitballs or do whatever mischievous things you do as an ill-behaved child. And I remember our report cards had a line for your conduct. And, if you either got an S for satisfactory or a U for unsatisfactory. And, bringing home a U for me was like a pretty regular occurrence. And, my poor parents even would come home from parent-teacher conferences and they would never say, why aren't you doing your homework? Or why aren't, what's your problem with math? It was always, why can't you behave? So, I really did have an issue with, trying to stay focused. But when 6th grade came around, I had a teacher who, I think it's not something that's unusual, who really made a lifelong impact on me. And I think that's the case oftentimes. Like I think of Tom Hanks when he won his Academy Award and he thanked his high school drama teacher after all those years. So as I got into 6th grade, it was within days, I met my fellow cohort in crime, Patty Cawley, and she would be the one who I would generally fool around with and cause trouble with. But we had this amazing young teacher. She was a woman who, Miss Aronson, who it was her very first teaching job, and it occurs to me now that she probably was only 23 or 24 years old, and for me, she set my life on a completely new trajectory. And so it was really only when Facebook was invented that I went looking for Patty Cawley and Miss Aronson, and I just found Patty. And we commiserated about our time, in 6th grade and about Miss Aronson and how, effective she was in sort of redirecting us and, how grateful we were for that. And, but we couldn't find Miss Aronson. And finally, after about a year, Patty got in touch with me and said, I've found Miss Aronson. I've discovered her married name, and here is, her Facebook page. And I friended her, and this is what I posted on her page. So, dear Miss Aronson, I am so delighted to be connecting with you again after all these years. I am a 63-year-old man who was in your very first classroom, my 6th grade class in Rockland. I have thought of you so many times over the years with such appreciation for all you taught me about myself. I remember I had such a hard time focusing and sitting still. I was always talking and being disruptive along with my sidekick, Patty Cawley, and you were always so patient yet firm. I know that at least for me, you turned my life around. I am sure that today I would be diagnosed with ADD or ADHD or whatever they may call it these days. I have to tell you that I think many teachers would have just considered me a handful, a troublemaker, too much to deal with, and disregard or marginalize me. You, however, I believe, took it as a challenge and were such a dedicated and committed teacher who, like Sidney Poitier in To Sir with Love, really taught us to not only honor and respect you, but to respect ourselves as well. I remember getting to a point where I never wanted to disappoint you. You were such a kind and patient teacher, and yet not one to trifle with. You inspired us to do and to be better, and that was a lesson of yours that has stuck with me all my life, and an inspiration I have always credited you with giving me. I think that because I knew you did not just throw up your hands and give up on me, I came to actually value myself more. Thank you very much. I remember you kept me after school until I learned my multiplication tables by heart, and I think of you often when I find myself using them. I moved away several months after 6th grade, so I never saw you again. I also have a wonderful memory of you taking 6 of us on an outing in Boston to see the Boston Pops. I remember you put all of your students' names into a hat and said you would pull out the names of the students who would accompany you. Patty Cawley's was probably the 4th name you called out. And there was mumbling in the classroom that one of the 2 class clowns would be going. And then the last name you pulled was mine, and the class erupted, finding it so funny that you would have both of us to contend with. I always believed you rigged that one, Miss Aronson. I was so blown away by that experience and by your generosity and commitment to opening new horizons for your students. Again, thank you. It made a big difference. Several years ago, the library in our community had a program called Sandwich Reads Together, in which they would select a book for the entire town to read and then sponsor events later to talk and celebrate the book. The committee asked me to write an essay for the local paper about what inspired me to love reading. I wrote about being in Miss Aronson's 6th grade class and how when we returned from lunch each day, she would have us fold our arms and rest our heads on our desktop, and she would read to us. You read Charlotte's Web, Stuart Little, and most importantly for me, The Yearling. I wrote of how your reading that book transported me to another place in a way that no book ever had before. I would go to school sick just to hear the next installment. Your reading of that story taught me about the power that a book could hold and made a reader of me for life. I have had a good life. I did go to college at UMass, graduated with honors and studied literature, and then ended up going into the restaurant business, at which I have turned out to be pretty successful. The name of my place is Cafe Chew in Sandwich on Cape Cod. We have a website and a Facebook page. I have been partnered with the wonderful man for the last 33 years, an Iowa farm boy, and we got married when it became legal here in 2004. He works with me at the restaurant. I am one of the lucky ones and couldn't ask to be better matched. Let me say in closing that growing up gay as a boy born in the mid-50s was not always an easy thing, but I believe that the self-esteem you provided me has always served me well. Thank you again for being such a wonderful teacher and human being, and if you ever find yourself on Cape Cod, please stop in. With love and gratitude, Bobby King with Patty Cawley. Thank you. Thank you. Our next storyteller will be Patrick Moynihan.
Hello, hello. I'm going to tell you a story, not about me, but about a man who embodied hatred. Our 37th president, Richard Milhous Nixon. He's a man who needs no introduction. He's at picture in the dictionary level. Not even picture, he's a definition. Hate, noun, what Nixon had in his heart instead of blood. Everyone knows how much this guy hated. He was just dripping with it, but why? His Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, said about him, "Can you imagine what this man would have been if someone had loved him?" To put that into perspective, imagine if John Belushi told you, "That guy really likes drugs." You're the expert, right? So, to understand that hate, I need to tell you a love story. And to do that, I'm going to talk about Dick Nixon, not the president, but the 25-year-old dork. Now, Dick lived in Yorba Linda, California, somehow a worse town name than Sandwich. Anyway, in Yorba Linda, Dick decided to do a little community theater, the dorkiest thing a 20-something can do in their hometown. Trust me. In that production, Dick met Pat Ryan, and he instantly had a little crush on Pat, so he decided to pull out a little bit of that Nixon charm. His move, the third time they ever talked, he told her, "I love you, I want to marry you." Smooth. Women love it when you do that. Now, that was weird for 1938. Usually you save that for the fourth time you talk to a woman, but Pat was not charmed. She wouldn't even go on a date with him. But the two remained friends, or rather, Pat remained his friend, and Dick remained obsessed. He even agreed to chaperone her on dates with other guys. A little less weird in 1938 than it is now. That was the style of the time. But Dick took it a step further. Pat's sister moved to Los Angeles, and Pat didn't own a car, but Dick did. So, on a Friday evening after work, Dick drove her all the way from Yorba Linda to LA. That's a 2-hour drive without traffic. Let's call it 3 with. He drops her off at her sister's apartment, straight back to Yorba Linda. 6 hours in the car round trip. He goes back on Sunday to pick her up. 6 more hours. He does this every weekend for 6 months. Up and down, up and down. So Pat's in LA, going to parties, hanging out with her friends, going on little dates, and Dick is in Yorba, watching paint dry. Now, this is where, in a normal love story, they'd grow a little bit closer on these long drives, and maybe Pat would realize there was a little something more to this dork. Maybe she should give him a shot. No. After 6 months, Pat bought her own car and didn't talk to Dick for 3 months. But did she at least realize she missed him, right? And she stood outside his house in the rain before they passionately embraced? No. Dick stalked her, tracked her down, and begged her to give him a shot. Again, women love when you do this. Take that moral home with you. And she did. Not even 2 years after they first met, the two were married. Dick was in love. Pat was comfortable. Everyone in the White House, absolutely everyone who worked for this guy, said it was the driest, passionless marriage they had ever seen. These guys work in D.C. They wouldn't even hold hands in public. If this was your friend, you would have him institutionalized. But Dick didn't have friends. No, Dick had enemies. Is there any wonder why this guy had so much hate? Some guys overcompensate with flashy sports cars. This uncharismatic dork became president of the United States. Can you imagine? Picture the betting odds for a pug at a dog track. You'd be like, what happened to the Greyhound? What's going on? Well, the Greyhound did win the first race, but then the CIA killed him, so that's another story. We'll get back into that later. But I did the math. Dick spent 93 days of his life driving Pat to LA. You don't think every single bombing run in Cambodia he approved, he was thinking about Pat on those dates with guys with dumb 1930s jock names like Biff or Chip or Skippy? What you need to learn about love and hate is this. If you don't love yourself, you're going to hate everybody. So, please show some love for our final storyteller. Give it up for Darby.
Good evening. I don't know whether it's, oh no, I'm okay, thank you. I don't know whether this is my most responsible job I've ever had to actually close a storytelling event in Sandwich, Mass, but I am. But I'm pleased to be here this evening, and I wanted to share a story about a musical unicorn and a very dramatic and happy pig. Now, the unicorn's name is Grace, and you hear it better now? Step up to it, okay. So I'm going to tell you about a story about Grace, a musical unicorn, and Christoph, the pig. He's a very dramatic, happy pig. And his name is Christoph, and the unicorn's name is Grace. But to be able to tell you that story, I need you to take a little trip with me. We need to go to Agape Island, which is love in Greek. On Agape Island, music is heard all over the dunes, throughout the island and the waterways that reach to the Atlantic Ocean. Above, the geese honk, a welcome cry as they fly overhead. Agape is part of the Sea Island chain, a barrier island off the coast of Key West. Though virtually unknown, It is the home of Grace, the unicorn, and Kristoff, the pig. A rather unlikely pair, you might say, but nonetheless they found each other, and the story that I'm about to share will tell the tale of love, understanding, acceptance, gratefulness, appreciation, and abundant spirit. They met on a shipwreck that was buried in the sand on the north side of the island. It was a place that Kristoff always went to bathe in the sun and feel really comfortable and just sort of catch up by himself, away from his family. But that particular day, he came across Grace, the unicorn. "I am a unicorn," Grace replied. "I know I must look very strange to you, but you don't have to fear me." "Oh, I'm not afraid," Kristoff quipped. "I'm in awe. You're just so pretty." "We are very rare," Grace responded. "Many think we are mythical characters, but as you can see, I'm very real." Kristoff's eyes widened and his curly little tail straightened right out, and he was so excited that this rare find was on his island and was soon to be his best friend. "Even amongst unicorns, I am unique," Grace said, lowering her head so Kristoff could see her rainbow-colored horn and her rainbow-colored tail. "Well, that's just fine," said Kristoff. "You see, while I'm a pig, I'm different too. I have a big raspberry in the middle of my forehead, and I have this really curly tail that every time I run in the woods, it gets caught on every prickly bush, and it hurts. It really hurts." "Has your horn ever gotten caught on a bush or a tree?" Kristoff asked, really hoping that Grace was going to tell him the same story. But what did Grace say? "I really don't roam the woods too much," she said. "I typically run through the plains, and I did that on the mainland. And I ran across a zazzle of zebras. They really didn't take to me too much. You know, I had the rainbow-colored horn, and I didn't have stripes. So they really sort of were very uneasy with me and didn't welcome me at all." "Well, that's not fair. I bet you can run with the best of them," Kristoff exclaimed. Grace felt a warm glow build in her belly. She really liked this pink pig, Kristoff. He was a package of innocence and understanding, wrapped up with his curly tail to anchor his way through life. Noticing that dusk was fast approaching, Kristoff said, "Come on, let's go inland. I'll meet you at the barn. You'll meet my family. It'll be great. You'll spend the night." Well, Grace sort of held back on the shipwreck and thought, I just met this little pig. I'm not quite sure how a family of pigs are going to deal with me, but okay, I'll give it a try. And so they go running through the woods, and Grace is able to see the light coming in from the barn on the land, and she felt very magical and very comfortable. And she heard Kristoff bolt through the doors of the barn, and the whole family was there, and she could hear them all raging and ranting and snorting and snoring. And she said, "What am I going to do?" And she walked through the barn, and before she knew it, a whole family was doing the pigtail dance all around her. Oh, she couldn't believe how much they just loved her. She felt so much love and affection. Deeply, it touched her in a new way. How could a family of pigs, she thought, immediately accept me? But they did. And she was very confused because she said, "But I'm a unicorn with a rainbow-colored horn to boot." But they did. And there were no questions. There was no judgment. But they did, and their words expressed exactly the abundance of their love for her. One of the major adventures on the book in the story is that they would go to the magic tree. Now, the magic tree is a really interesting place, and it was Kristoff's second favorite place beyond the shipwreck. Because there, if you put your hand to the heart that was carved on the tree trunk, you began to understand the universe's knowing of who you are, why you're here, and what your journey will be like. and you would visit the magic tree as often as you liked. And Christoph would go many times during a month, but he really wanted to show Grace the magic tree. But Grace was really scared, because when you get really close to the magic tree, everything begins to rattle and roam on your body. You get really scared because everything trembles. You don't know what's happening, but it's the force of the universe coming to you, telling you, giving you an all-knowing. But Grace did it, and all at once she realized that she was not different at all. She was Grace. She was herself. She was supposed to be a musical unicorn, blessed with a rainbow horn and tail. She was unique and filled with love, just the way she was. Every night at sunset, Christoph and Grace would toggle off to the wildflower-filled pasture near the barn. Nestling into the soft earth, they would wait for the first sparkly stars to appear, especially in the deep, darkening midnight blue sky. "There's one," shouted Christoph. Grace threw back her head and laughed, and the sun, catching her rainbow horn in the afterglow, and she said, "You know, Christoph, tonight may be the darkest night I've ever been involved, and I bet you we can see Monoceros, the constellation on the celestial equator that is the unicorn." And so they waited, and the sky got darker and darker, and there it was. And Christoph saw the first time Monoceros, the unicorn constellation on the celestial equator. They had many adventures like this under the stars. Grace would share stories of her life before meeting Christoph. He was in awe of her bravery, and each story had a clear message that Christoph anxiously awaited to hear. Grace's good heart shined through these moments. It was during this time together that Christoph realized how her caring and creative nature saw what most beings miss. Grace sensed the world in a new way that Christoph could not. Oftentimes, when Grace got sleepy in the pasture, she felt comfortable sharing stories about showing kindness to all living creatures, leaving this earthly plane better than before you arrived, being patient with yourself, and try not to control everything, just allowing life to unfold as it is meant to be. Just be yourself, be who you need to be, and loving yourself on this journey of life, and that you deserve love and kindness in return. Showing compassion to yourself and others, and staying positive even when life seems too big and complicated. Enjoying the present moments, and let whatever bothered you yesterday go. Christoph never tired of hearing Grace's stories, and Grace, well, she never tired of sharing them. They were inseparable in their time together. They explored their own unique talents, became comfortable with who they were, and understood that they were indeed loved. And there's no greater gift than that. You can always visit the island of Agape by going to your own heart, for Grace and Christoph's story awaits you if you believe and have faith. May I conclude the story by inviting you all to color the world in love and find in your own heart your own magic, imagination, and creativity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would all the tellers please go up front, please? Would all the tellers come out on the stage and please go up front for one more round of applause from our audience? Weren't they great? There they go. Come on, come on, come on. Move a little faster. Thank you. Yay! Nice job. Thank you so much. Thank you.